You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
This is Ken Vellante with the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast, and I'll tell you right off the bat, I'm really excited to talk to Craig Randall, writer-poet, nearby Corvallis, Oregon. I'm in Albany, Oregon. Corvallis, known as the main location, the campus of Oregon State University. And just to let you know, Craig writes poetry. He's got a book series that started, the Doom That Came to Astoria. And I've read the most recent collection of poetry, Among the Wildflowers. And we're going to be talking about writing, we're going to be talking about art, and we're going to be talking about mental health, overcoming, and growth and change. Craig Randall, thanks so much for coming to Something Rather Than Nothing.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Ken. I'm really excited. Again, just couldn't be more pumped to be able to really just talk about art with a fellow enthusiast. It's just fun. I mean, how fun it is to just nerd out and then to get to talk about, the books, but really where they came from and what my hope is that they become or that they are to others. So
I love that word, Craig, hope, because my recent experience is just there's tons going on. My firm belief that the world is completely transforming and will not resemble in near time what it did before. And amongst this, there's something beautiful about writing and beautiful about poetry, particularly as it presented. I was reading Among the Wildflowers, and the beauty of thinking about flowers and growth, and within this volume, for everybody to understand, there's a deep reckoning of transformation of what has come before into something that is new. Craig, back behind this whole thing, back behind you doing art, it's so closely connected to healing and mental health. So that's right there. Tell us about where the writing comes from. From you.
Well, there's kind of a not long way, like time-wise to look at it, but like the longer trajectory of it, and then there's kind of the more immediate kind of exigence or story behind it. But the big picture is I didn't realize it until I was probably 27. I'm 37 now, but I've struggled with anxiety and depression my whole life, but it was never talked about. So I had no idea. Like there was no language, right? There was no, as we were talking about expression, even before we jumped on the show, right? Like
sure.
It was never expressed to me culturally in my home, which was not to the fault of my home, right? It just wasn't normal.
Yeah.
People who went out, when we were growing up, people who went to therapy were cuckoo, and like it was very frowned.
Yeah, it was the
biggest stigma in the world, which I think that's changing.
Yeah.
Not probably as fast as it needs to be, right? But so that's the short end of it. When I got married when I was younger, and then I was 27 though, and my oldest child was born, and all of a sudden, even like I'd wake up super depressed, but I just thought that was normal. When I got married, and then like my wife, I don't know, we found a way to kind of work around it basically. But then all of a sudden, I had a child, and I was like, oh, I'm not here. But I need to be here for this other human. So that really just skyrocketed me into this like 10-year journey now of healing. And I really started tackling things. I started going to therapy for the first time. I just wanted to put the pieces together. The funny thing was it wasn't really for me. And when it started, it was really for them. Right. Which I think there's a lot there even to unpack of why wasn't I willing to do it for myself? Why wasn't I willing to do it for my own experience? It just wasn't on the radar. But the more immediate where these books came from, so I started taking anxiety meds about 7 years ago. And it was revolutionary. It was life changing. Like, I don't know if you've ever taken them, but for anybody that has,
Yeah. I've received much help with
it's
anxiety
amazing.
meditation. Yeah.
And like, there's always a couple day buffer when you have to adjust to them, right? Which is just like when you're just jittery and you just pounded like 20 cups of coffee and the world is ending. But then all of a sudden you come out the other side. And I remember thinking like, is this what other people feel all the time?
Yeah.
Crazy. And that was like
Right.
the stark
Yeah.
contrast. Fast forward, a couple years later, I was just devouring, books about the brain and healing and spiritual things to medical things, everything I could. And I'm an English teacher by trade, and so I've always loved stories and whatnot. But I came to a point where I felt like I was doing really well, and for whatever reason, I had this maybe stigma in my head still that like you're not going to be healed or normal until you're off the meds. Which I think that's an entire different conversation, right?
Yeah,
That I've had
that's
with
yeah,
people
yeah, of course.
that. So I tried to go off of them, and it just crashed. I tanked into the darker, into a place that I had never been before in terms of anger and dark. Like it just ripped open every wound at once. It was crazy. In the months of recovering from that, I was meeting with a psychologist to kind of put the rails back together. Right? It's like I had
Right.
my negative thought patterns that had developed my whole life about the
Yeah.
world, about myself. But I had built this like other pathway of hope and like, oh, things can work. Things are okay. And
Yeah.
then when I went off the meds, it just snapped. But I had this idea that I
A
could,
quick rebound over to the other side of energy or
it was
something. Yeah.
nuts. Right. And then,
Yeah.
but I had this, what I think where a lot of people maybe who haven't had a chance to build a more positive frame, I had experienced it, so I knew it was possible. So I just went to work and I went to town to rebuild that road. In the midst of that, a psychologist was like, well, you like reading and writing. Why don't you try some writing? In hindsight, I showed up a month later at our next session with chapter 1 of The Doom That Came to Astoria
All
and the first
right.
20 poems of To Chase the Sun. And they were like, oh, I meant like journaling. But it was just how I processed it. I like the Doom series is literally about a character who's just analogous to me, and I put myself in this fictional world that has some sensational elements, to kind of, because I just needed to know, like I needed to know if I could hope and experience like that again. But even bigger than that, like I was teaching hero journey stuff to my students, and the more I was teaching about the hero journey when I had crashed, the more I realized I don't believe this is for me. I don't, and it was like, there's this ingrained, at that point, it was almost like, this map doesn't fit my experience.
It's a story for other people or something.
Exactly. Right. So you talk about like representation in media and in the world. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I just had to know, like, can I still be a hero if I struggle? Can I still be a hero if I don't? And I'm not talking about like the end of a book where the the hero. I'm talking about the whole dang thing, right? So Doom was really born out of that. It was like this weird horror suspense story, and the whole structure of it changed. I wanted to know what a hero journey could look like for someone like me, and it's interesting because any negative feedback from Doom is generally somebody that's, I think, misunderstanding that. Because in like Star Wars, Luke Skywalker, in the first third of any hero journey, that's when the hero is like, has an opportunity and rejects it and then turns and starts their hero journey, like right from the beginning. But in Charlie's journey, that really doesn't happen until like the beginning of book 3.
Sure.
So then the challenge became, how do you still make that engaging? How does, I don't know. To me, it's been a really interesting study that's led me to a lot of healing. And then the poetry books are literally just autobiographical. It's just me writing to understand the moments in the journey. So like To Chase the Sun is about finding hope. And then Among the Wildflowers that just came out is about, how do we cultivate it? Once we've experienced it, what does it look like to maintain it? What does it look like to Because I think that's something that I always misunderstood growing up too. Like I just thought hope was something you experienced or you didn't. It didn't occur to me that it's something we could generate, galvanize.
The generation of hope.
Which I think we need right now more than ever, right?
Thank you, Craig. There's so much I connect to, and I wanted to say particularly about Among the Wildflowers. What's been really cool on the show, on the podcast, is I talk to a lot of creators, and I believe that the ground that's been cut for something rather than nothing opens up a ton. And recently, and I find it fascinating for me when themes and trends start to emerge within the show, and it could be just organizing and connecting with people, and poets know other poets, and actors know other actors. But there's been the development of a couple pieces just recently of poetry's always been part of the podcast. As a matter of fact, within the first 10 episodes, I had two poets, Bunkang Tuan, a good friend of mine, and Joanna Valenti, similar last name to mine. But I've had poets on throughout, and recently I've had more poets, which allows me to go back into one component of my identity at different parts of my life as being connected to poetry and that power. I want to tell you something about Among the Wildflowers, and it comes from the way I view it. I have a background in training in practice, uneven over my life for the last 25 years in Taoism, Buddhism, meditation, mindfulness. These poems are, and you explain it right at the beginning, are short, haiku, a capturing of a spare amount of words. Which poetry does to hold images. And I can tell you one thing, these are healing words that are so accessible. And even on the idea that there can be too many words if my head's all bleh, like I don't want to read, Paradise Lost and understand the cosmos. I want to understand, I want to understand putting the seed in the ground. And so I just wanted to tell you that in the idea of crystallizing idea and word and art as a healing piece, that's what these are, and I think they're significant in that way. And I would say that to anyone. I think they're particularly important in that way.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that, and I think that's. And again, the intriguing thing about that, this book is mostly haiku, and the next ones there's going to be a third one, and it's longer. There's a lot more, and it's more haiku, but there's also a lot more longer ones. First one's an interesting mix, but when I started realizing when I started writing what became the first one, I started writing all of it without the intention or knowledge that it would publish. It was just really all of it. It's the interesting part of the process too, right? All of this was just writing for me. It's all tied directly to my healing. And then I shared it with some friends, and they were like, other people need to read this or have the chance to experience this. And I was like, that's been the thrilling part, right? Is my own journey can, therefore other people can see it in it, right? Because there's similarities. And but when I was writing, I was teaching poetry in a different class when I was writing a lot of the things that went into To Chase the Sun, the first one. And it was interesting because I explained in the introduction of that one, I would start having a panic attack because it was, so newly off the meds. And I'd read this book about the brain that talked about, trying to harness your thought pattern, and writing can be a good way to do that. So as soon as you start having a panic attack, if you just sit down and start writing out and kind of grounding yourself in how you feel, it can go away sometimes. So I started doing that. I started having a panic attack, and I just grabbed my phone and start writing exactly how I felt. And then the nerd in me would go back to it later and be like, oh, there's almost a rhythm here. It's kind of fun. And then I would rearrange it.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, this is cool. That actually sounds cool. It's just super depressing. Right. Because it was about the panic attack, which none of those are in the book. with intention.
Yeah, that's just a process stuff.
Exactly. And that's where it started, right? And then I'm sitting here teaching poetry to like ninth graders and having a blast. And we're talking about the tone shifts and the turns and kind of where things resolve. And it started striking me as I was reading this book about the brain. I was like, wait, why don't I start with how I'm feeling, but end it with where I want to be?
Yeah.
And like use that kind of poetic shift and tonal adjustment to kind of, and then the beautiful thing was when I would write that, it would take me there. And then all of a sudden I would go from about to have a panic attack to more peace than I'd experienced in the whole week before. And it was just brilliant. Like, it was like, oh my gosh. And then where the haiku came from was, how do I get there faster? Yeah. And also I was writing The Doom That Came to Astoria, and my wife kept making fun of me because she's like, hey, this is a great 10 pages. Now make it 2. So I was trying to practice brevity. Yeah. I was like, oh, I'm going to start writing haiku so I can practice compressing ideas. I mean, it started out as like a tactical.
Great idea. Yeah. Great idea.
Yeah. It was like a tactical exercise. But then they became like, and they're not necessarily even traditional haiku, because most of the ones in this book, I almost try to connect 2 ideas, the first 5 syllables and half the second line, and then it shifts right at the middle, finishes that second line, and then so there's almost the hope is to create this like juxtapose in a lot of it with the flow, and again, just messing around, having fun with the ideas, but
and thanks for talking about it too. We're gonna bang out a couple art questions in a minute, but one thing I wanted to tell you, because I heard in you talking, the realizations that we can discover, and hearing you talk about your experience, I have some strong parallels. I'm 50 years old, and a lot of consideration around mental health for males in a gender dichotomous world I grew up in. Now, I want to tell you one little piece here that I think you'll find really interesting, that I always remembered as it was a way almost to diagnose and see what was happening in my head, and it's related to mindfulness and chaos. So when I started meditating, I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was a graduate student in philosophy at Marquette University. The Jesuits gave me a scholarship to study philosophy at Marquette, and so I'm from Rhode Island. I make my way out that way in my mid 20s, and I one of the first courses I took as a graduate student was Buddhism. So I was taking Plato, Aristotle, something else. No, and Buddhism was maybe the 3rd graduate course at the time. Learned some meditation techniques, but check this out. What I noticed that I'd be at the meditation temple, and when I first went into meditation, I'm saying, "There's no fucking way I can do this." Like my head is like my head is like, those like World War III scenarios, war game scenarios, like shit blowing up. I'm like, yeah, but within that type of activity, I believe I have a key to unlock. My mind can go from that, and with basic meditation techniques, I can achieve and get into a state that would astound others. I described it like, there's no fucking way you can do it, Ken. Like in their head, because like your head's always banging, going nuts. So check this out. I go into meditation. I noticed a trend that started to happen. I'd receive some sort of difference or levelness. Totally. And I'd leave that spot in Milwaukee and I go to the bar. I go to jazz bar right after. So I was feeling good, but I couldn't reside. Couldn't reside there. Couldn't reside in that space of evenness. So it was jazz music and it was drinking. I was like, fucking I'm living, right? And it was that opposite counterbalance. So in this experience, I was cognizant of myself enough to know, being like, okay, that one's different from that one. And you keep bouncing, you keep bouncing from that end of the stadium to the other. So was a way of realizing the dynamic energy within my brain and what I was trying to do with it. Right. So
Totally.
like my head or mind was saying, maybe you don't deserve to reside in this area. This area is too boring. It's too peaceful. I don't know what to do with that. And so it was a real deep realization, and it's a dynamic that from that point on, I interact with highs and lows, and
that deserve piece is interesting, right?
Yeah.
We can't, and that's where so much of my journey, even within the last year, always coming back to that value judgment of what I deserve or not, right? And that
and
is
feeling that and that there's a nub there of and I think we're within suffering and expression. One of the things that I've also realized in a journey on mental health is that how absolutely predominant women are in my life, because I work in a profession where I represent maybe 75% women in the K to 12 profession. My mom's super important to me. I've always been comfortable in learning and prefer being around women. So there's within the general gender dichotomy, there's other ability to grow and realize and to interact and understand in a different way, and that's been very helpful for me to what in a gender dichotomy in the generation I grew up with, what feminine can be expressed, what comfort around femininity can be expressed from a male, that the general dynamic people described it as thing happens, squish down, next task, squish down, next task, angry, squish down, next task. And I
relate to that in very incredible, like that was my journey too. Like, I think the things that I'm realizing are my strengths, I hid for years because it was considered feminine and I wasn't a woman. Right?
Rock and roll.
But even I lived in Astoria for 7 years, and which is a wonderful town. But it's interesting that, like, I feel like within the spectrum of the United States, and we lived in Europe for 4 years, and I didn't see this there at all, anywhere in any country I went to. It was interesting. It was like, there's always difference between the cities and rural towns.
Sure.
But it's like when I moved out to the coast from Portland, I'd lived in Portland my whole life, who, like, most of my coastal friends called it the People's Republic of Portland, right? We were all communists.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. I was literally like, some of my friends at the coast just called me their token communist friend. I was like, okay. I just try to, like, think of all people instead of, I don't know,
we've filled similar roles at times.
Right.
Whether asked for or not.
But we, like, you get like a couple families together, and the men always gravitate to the couches and the women gravitate to the kitchen. And I always ended up in the kitchen because their conversations were a lot more engaging, a lot more relatable. I don't know. I got tired of faking that I changed the brakes on my car, even though I didn't need it.
This is just uncanny. Everybody, Craig and I connecting. Craig's right down the road. It's so great to connect in this manner. Everybody, Craig and I are going to bang out some philosophy questions. We're going to rock and roll right in. Craig, you went to therapy, started writing on an assignment. That writing has transformed into art. What is art? Oh,
such a good question. Art is, I was thinking through, because you sent a couple of these questions over, and I love that when I answered the question, I was thinking through, like, what my answer was for what is art. And then I loved that when I got down to, like, that idea of, something rather than nothing. I feel like art, this is going to be abstract. Art is the something, and without it, we are nothing. Like, I mean, if you look at art, mumbling here.
No. I haven't had
So, like,
anybody connect it that quickly.
that's to me, like, I mean, and then I got to the bottom of the questions, and I was like, oh, that's why the puck. That's, and I was making the connection of like, oh, this makes. I mean, I knew it made sense, but it makes deeper sense now. But to me, art is man's finest achievement in making the abstract concrete, right?
Yeah.
And like the poems in Among the Wildflowers, I think my favorite comment about my poetry is when I get people who like, I don't like poetry because I don't understand it. It makes me feel dumb. I like your poetry because I get it.
Yep.
And I can wrap my head around it, and it takes me to where I wanted to go anyway. And I was like, that's the greatest compliment I feel
that's a beauty. That's a beauty,
right? Because art to a certain degree should be, it makes the inaccessible accessible, right? And why do we watch movies? Why do we go to plays? Why do we listen to music? We do it to be moved. When I feel a certain way, I put on certain albums, right? Because I want to be transported to the way I want to feel. So art is, it's the vehicle in that regard, right?
I really appreciate your comments. I was in. It provides an opportunity. I saw the singer and artist I adore, Sharonova.
Yeah.
And just an incredible singer. She's performed with the Decemberists on the Hazards of Love album. She's that spirit voice there. And I was over in Beaverton, Oregon, and part of the Oregon Symphony was playing with her the Blue Hour, which was composed by, I believe it was 4 or 5 female composers. Sharonova, I knew Shara was going to be ascending to this part of the piece. And the biggest challenge within the piece, I only knew that. I wouldn't be able to necessarily recognize it musically in the build-up, but it was there. And she was singing this part, and she does this to me a lot. The chills were there. 2 people, 2 sections over, yelped when she hit that note, almost in the same way. They not even gasp, was like,
yeah.
And I was, like that, on the art moments, like in writing their song, like it was like that person has no ability, like there's no socialization of the response. Like it's like right out, and that happened. And
it's powerful.
I interviewed Shara, and I should remember to answer the question. It's the only time I ever asked. I said, I've seen you 2-3 times, Shara. And I get those goosebumps. How the hell you do that? I should remember exactly. Like we always want to ask somebody. It's an impossible question, not fair.
Yeah, right?
I don't know why physiologically your body did this when I did that.
Yeah. No, that's a good, I mean, but important things to grapple with though, right? Like why evident, I don't know. Was my body needing something in that, or was it,
did I experience heaven or God,
right?
or God, or a muse?
Profoundness. But I feel like that's where like story theory, right, or music theory, like there's probably are these concrete explanations within that, but not everybody understands those, right? Like since I started writing, I've taught writing and reading and analyzing literature, but since I started writing The Doom That Came to Astoria, and I'm just finishing the 3rd book now, I've read, as many books as I can on the craft of story. And it is amazing to learn, I was analyzing big components of it, but then to see the little fine brushstrokes that writers can like, oh, if I paint this over this way and create this emotion, then when I do this over here, it's going to create and bring hopefully the reader here. And it's been fun toying with that in my own writing. And there's about 5 friends that will read all my books before I put them out. And and I'm always looking for, my favorite is when I get a text from one that, like, sometimes, or like when the 2nd book was coming out, I sent it to like these 5 friends, and within about the same time of the month where they were all kind of reading along, I would just get a text message that said, "I hate you." And then I knew that I'd accomplished my goal of getting them to feel a certain way at a certain time.
Yeah.
That intention, which again is just, I mean, that's a super, I think as a writer, that's a super rewarding part. Like, did what I intended come out?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's part of one of the things in conversation, and just the idea of like maybe like podcasting or access, and having the conversation allow other people to connect, because our art for me is like the one thing I can't fathom existence without. Like, I mean, we can always say like air and water and all. So I'm saying poetically, I'm saying, why bother? Like, that is the power of art, and particularly for sensitive folks in creation.
Oh, 100%.
And in that piece, quick question on the craft of writing. I haven't read too much about, but I remember being very moved and finding very helpful advice from two quite different writers, John Gardner, who did I think a famous might have been art of fiction, and I adore Stephen King's On Writing, and
that's one of my favorites.
I adore that book, and one of the biggest pieces there that I connect maybe even more strongly with, I adore Stephen King, but I'm from New England.
You guys have an extra connection then.
Yeah, an extra one, but also
I will never have with him.
Yeah, it's like I get, I can picture. I'm from Rhode Island. He's up there in Maine, but his journey with addiction. I'm sober from alcohol for 13 years, and at the time, I think I was still drinking, but reading two things. When he wrote Cujo, he was on drinking a case of 16-ounce Budweisers a night,
right,
and cocaine. And somebody had asked him about the experience of Cujo. He's like, I don't fucking remember Cujo.
I was going to ask. That's the one he didn't remember writing, right? Because he was
like, I don't know. About a dog.
Yeah,
some sort of rabid dog. Sounds scary to me.
Oh,
but no, I think I just noticed that when you mentioned about like the structure of the craft too, which is like shit, but a way to get into an engaging way to look at writing and to look at the craft and what you're trying to execute, because you and I know, 1 in 1,000 you're gonna write it and it's gonna be, I don't know, maybe near done or some sort of miracle of writing that way, but everything else, is the chiseling. Craig, and we started to bump into this. What's the role of art? So, I heard you answer, but like, what's art supposed to do?
I mean, kind of tack it to kind of a little bit of what you said as you were talking about your art to you, and art is there for us to understand things that I think otherwise we wouldn't understand. Art is there to not just, I think it can be there to guide us, but also to explain things to us, right?
Yeah.
I know this goes around social media a lot, and it's one of those. There's an Ethan Hawke like little clip where he's talking very passionately, right? And
I saw that one. Yeah,
it's one of those things that like you're on whatever it is, and you see. I watch that whole thing every single time. He's like, so he talks about how so many people don't really appreciate poetry or art. Why is poetry? But then when a parent dies, or when anybody dies, you're like, you are filled with something that you don't understand.
Yeah.
But then art is there to kind of almost walk you through it.
Yeah.
Because people have, I think everybody can be an artist, and I think everybody is an artist in their own way, as long as they've been allowed to kind of pursue and interact with it. But the people that can really frame things in a meaningful way, right? Like, I mean, you almost get to the where somebody is objectively like really succeeding at art, right? The books that you read and weep, the movies you watch
Yeah.
over and over and over, the Sharon Nova song that you're like, I need to go
Yep.
listen to that right now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I'm gonna get the infusion from the sky. Yeah.
Absolutely. They're a map, right? Art is, I mean, that part of my intention with the Northwest Trilogy, The Doom That Came to Astoria, its sequel, The Dreams in the Pearl House, and then the third one that's coming out. It started out as a map, a question for me. I was trying to find my way on a map that to me didn't exist, right? Me as a male who struggles severely with mental health, and there's not really a lot of roadmaps out there for me. So writing this story was me creating a roadmap to figure out if I can be the hero of my own journey. I've since found the answer to that question. And now every time I do a little signing, every time I talk to people about the book, it becomes more and more of an imperative understanding for me that I hope that this trilogy can be a roadmap for others who have similar questions, right? And they're like,
You
I don't
can't
know if I
and you can't depend on your own brain in understanding the
totally.
interaction of the art with other folks. But I think artists can trick themselves into it because you have a mission and you have an idea of what it is, and then the way it is,
Yeah.
as a poet in Corvallis or a podcaster here, and people interact and they respond, and it's brilliant. But it's it's knowing and seeing what you didn't know of how
Oh, absolutely.
right, like they're like, hey, why, they could come up to you and say, hey, why were you obsessed with shadows and everything, and you're like, I didn't know I wrote about shadows
Like,
in the book,
absolutely.
right? And they're like, they see you as obsessed with it, and you're like, oh shit, like, oh, I guess there were a lot of shadows in that,
Right.
or whatever it
This
is.
guy, this one guy read Doom and he was messaging with me, asking me, and there he was recognizing a couple things that I did with great intention. And then he took it like 4 steps further and like made these other connections, which I thought were quite profound. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I did that. I didn't mean to do that.
Yeah. Yeah,
But the
well,
fact that he thought,
and then you could see, see that. I think I really love that process. It's also fun for us to talk about because I think what's clear here is that unabashedly opening up space for those who suffer, for human beings who
yeah,
suffer and who suffer unnecessarily. The Buddhist analysis for me is that we all suffer. Don't cry
yeah,
over it.
totally.
Don't
Part of life.
cry over it. You are you're plopped into this, body's plopped in there and all this, and you're going to suffer. But the Buddhist analysis is very much something I think you and I connected to. Okay, you're suffering because you're a suffering being, and now you're suffering because other people are suffering because you're a suffering being. And then the psychology is that, well, you only need to deal with the first level. You're a
Yeah,
suffering being. You're a suffering being that puts you in place with everybody, and you can't change that fact. Well, let's just not compound the shit that
exactly.
creates.
Oh, 100%. Like, let's deal with the stuff that we can, right?
Yeah.
And then move through. Absolutely. Absolutely. And
Uh,
like, and I think, and being able to, I think the biggest takeaway for me in writing all of it was realizing that I had a lot more autonomy in the situation than I thought.
ah,
And I think that's where the anxiety comes from in a lot of cases, is just feeling powerless, right?
I
And feeling like I have no way to impact or change this, right? And then the suffering just heaps.
there's incredible ways. I think of since we're talking about writing, I think of a seminal work, and I some folks know about it in psychology and literature, but it's William Styron's "Darkness Visible," which is
Ooh,
his thin, smaller book description of his depression.
ooh,
And yeah, Darkness Visible. It reads as an essay, and I think Styron is a brilliant writer. And
yeah,
his daughter has written some memoirs about his experience. But I think of like a text like that, and for folks who haven't heard about Darkness Visible, William Styron is a short memoir piece that is honestly brings you right in. It brings you right into his experience and going through it, and it's extremely powerful, remarkably vulnerable, particularly if like myself, I look at, we do this with writers. I mean, I view Styron as a writing giant, and then to see, an opening and a showing of what he went through. So yeah.
Totally. Well, that's like, even Doom opens up. The first chapter of Doom is just a massive panic attack. And it's interesting, like the 3 poetry books and the novels, they couldn't be more different, right? And it's interesting how, and I appreciate feedback in both directions. I've had some really kind people reach out and be like, "Hey, I just wanted to say I'm not going to finish your book, but I really appreciate that it's out there, but it was too close to home for me." Sure. Right. And I put a trigger warning in the second book. I was like, "Oh yeah, by the way, if you're like currently struggling, probably not the read for you."
Yeah, right? There needs to be some distance, or the caveat that you put at the beginning of.
Absolutely. Yeah. But then other people, again, I think one of the most rewarding pieces, again, the book, if I knew the book was going to I didn't, like when I was writing it, it's fairly autobiographical in the themes, in like certain parts of the story. I probably wouldn't have made it so personal had I known that like I was actually going to put it out and people would read it.
Yeah, and then it's out, and then it's the reality that surrounds it, and then you some surprise around that too, and it's not easy to do. It's not easy to do. As a matter of fact, I would say that in truly writing, if for me, if it's to be revealing of myself, I am for myself. I don't reside there. As a matter of fact, I would tell you that as a writer, relinquishing control of the narrative and how I'm framed is actually my biggest task. Letting go with how I'm expecting to see perceived and want to be perceived. It's not that I don't have the ability to be honest, and particularly in conversation. People are like, I can't believe what he just told me, or whatever. Because I don't know. I'm an organizer. I'm a human person. I'm an artist. I just connect with people that way. But in the writing, I think that's the piece when you were talking about. Oh, wait a second. There's a lot of me in there.
Does it seem more set in stone in that regard?
It's more set in stone, and I've let control. I can't control changing it after it's out.
Okay. Now I'm just intrigued. What about the podcast? Because we're talking some pretty vulnerable things here. Where's the difference?
No, I don't know. No worries in the slightest. And it's interesting too, because maybe it's verbal and it's a permanent record. So if you take a look right now, Craig, on this question, I think about this. If you start this podcast, you'll be almost towards episode 200. We're recording here on a Sunday. Next Sunday, you're going to hear that last sign off. There's almost 7 days of material to listen through straight through. So as far as a record of voice in person, I can be completely duplicated. I can be completely AI created with inflections and accent and everything. But for some reason, that doesn't intimidate me. I don't know.
That's interesting. Well, maybe because, like you said, like because it is really we're just having a conversation, right?
I can show my learning in a future episode. I admit. So when I start, when I start working and making mistakes, white colonial mistakes of learning about Native and Indigenous culture. Say like that was a stupid ass question. I'm not beating myself up, but I realize there I'm gonna be like, whoa, like slow your roll about how you understand everything. So as maybe getting at, maybe I can answer your question. Maybe as if there's availability of describing growth, or maybe that's the change I'm able to express, that I'm not even close to the person that I was when I began the show, or whatever's connected to it. I'm completely different.
It's not it's almost like even though the episode is wrapped and out there, but the whole thing isn't done, right?
That's what it is. Thanks for helping me, Craig.
That's what we do, right? We make the abstract concrete.
Jeez, hey, I'm gonna switch his podcast around and just like, hey, I changed the podcast. My guest just asked me questions, and I try to.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm just intrigued. I'm also a teacher, so I'm like perpetually. Half the time in class, I'm like, oh, that's a good question. Let's throw everything out and let's just all focus on this. I just want to know. I want to know. That's just interesting because, especially in like high level analysis, right? You know, like collegiate analysis classes or whatever it is, you start talking about things in terms of just artifacts. So like, I train my older students, like you look at a book as an artifact, you know, a newspaper article is an artifact, a podcast is an artifact. And when you use that generic term, it kind of tries to put them all on a similar plane. They all have their unique differences.
Sure.
But like, and I guess I've thought about that with Doom, the Doom that came to Astoria. Like if I were to write that book now, it would be different because I've grown and I've learned. It's very dark. And my hope is but the third one that I'm writing now is a lot more hopeful. There's still huge darkness elements in it, but it's interesting. My hope is that my own growth and change is just reflected in that, right? And you see, and even I'm going to write a story afterwards that is kind of tackling some of the same ideas, but with my new way of thinking of it.
Yeah. That mind is the mind is capable of radical change, healing, transformation, creating new pathways. Craig, two more pieces. I wanted to. I was hoping you'd read some of the poems from Among the Wildflowers. And folks, listeners, as a backdrop, I had mentioned to Craig the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast, connected with a great podcast, Rooted, by M. Grebner Gaddis, and I'm going to be on Rooted. She's going to tell me all about my favorite flower, sunflowers, and also she's going to be on Something Rather Than Nothing. But it was such a wonderful experience. I've had that conversation with them, a couple conversations, and then going through Among the Wildflowers and the section about rooted and rootedness. So it was just a great synchronicity and connection. And I was wondering if you could share some of that, Craig.
Yeah. How many of them do you want me to read?
I want all the rooted, if you could.
They're just the rooted section. Absolutely. And then for those listening, Among the Wildflowers, all the sections they kind of follow chronologically a journey of healing. Like the first one being like untamed soil. So they're all around that theme of, and then gradually like you get rooted, and then the growth happens and and whatnot. So this is rooted. This is the rooted section. There's about 7 or 8 small poems. First one is Among the Wildflowers, Part 2. I will root myself among the wildflowers, among such seeds of hope. So just short little kind of images of trying to get me rooted, right?
Yeah.
The place where I can heal. My heart and home. No matter where we plant our feet, you will always be my heart and home. It's to my wife. This is one of my personal favorites. This next one's called The Most Resilient Seed. Hope is the most resilient seed. It can be planted in any soil, especially when we think it can't.
Yeah.
Hold strong to deep roots. Lean in like a tree into the wind. Hold strong to the deep roots. Endure. Only you can let them. Only you can let them steal your peace. So plant it deep in starlit fields. I like the juxtaposition of that.
It's really beautiful.
Thank you. This is a little bit of a longer one. It's called Stand Till True. Most the blooms I see in fields hold to their roots in painful strain, unaware the powers they wield, unaware they'll come again. Hold to their roots in painful strain, the blooms do fear their beauties fade, unknowing they will come again, unknowing they will be remade. The blooms do fear their beauties fade, yet wildflowers stand till true, knowing they will be remade to spread their wonder, beauteous hue. The wildflowers stand till true, below deep skies of calming blue, to spread their wonder, beauteous hues, offering hope to hold and trust for you. Um, I just love that idea that I sat there contemplating the flowers know that they're going to come back. Because if I start thinking about the question in my own terms, I think like going back to even something you said.
Do you know you're
earlier
going to come
on,
back?
That value judgment that like, I know they will, but why don't I think I will?
Yeah.
Where the heck did that thought come from? That's
Yeah.
not conducive to living.
Right.
That's not helpful.
That's not helpful.
And I've come back in the past, so I'm going to come back again.
That's a boulder in front of me. Don't need it.
Yeah. Right. Okay. I have deepest need of roots, so as to weather every drought and storm. The most rooted blooms of spring will last and learn to see another sun. And then this, I've gotten a lot of messages of this one being several people's favorite. Your tears will water seeds. Fear not, for your tears will water seeds to root and raise much needed life.
Amen. That's beautiful.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, that's in you know, it's always like, how do you talk about poetry? I'll just go back to what I said. It you know, words and the ideas, and just, gosh, the rootedness, the we're in Oregon, these trees that are alive and are connected, the rooted, like, hold on, stick into the ground, and just stick with that, because if the winds are blowing all this way, just stick in
right
the ground, and that's it.
What's going to give you life, right? What's going to allow you to thrive in chaos. And yeah, and then, like, I think I didn't even think about this. Maybe I was conscious of it as they were being written, or because, again, all of these are born out of reminders that I need. If I feel like hell, I'm just like, I'll grab my pen or my phone and I'll just start writing words down that are kind of pinballing around how I feel, and then all of a sudden I start understanding how I feel. And then once you have that understanding, it's like, okay, do I want to feel this? Is this helpful? No. Let's move over here then. And but you, like, I just lost my train of thought.
No, it's cool. I'll set you up with what we need to move into, and it's a little bit different. So if you have anything else to say, I think you answered the something rather than nothing in there, but I'm opening up the something rather than nothing, finalizing comments. Also, I need you to let the listeners know where to find your stuff. I luckily can walk over to Browser's Bookstore, talk to Abram over there, and awesome. get all my stuff. And so, and Browser's Bookstores in Albany, Oregon, the official bookstore, is something rather than nothing. So I can do this really easily. But tell us anything else we need to know about something and nothing, and where to find your stuff.
Absolutely. I think, again, go like the something rather than nothing, without. And I was going to mention this earlier, actually. I think the highest, if you look at like geography and like the study of people in anthropology, a higher, not higher level, but like higher developed, the highest level of like cultural development is art. If a society is producing art, that means their culture has developed and advanced to the point where somebody is like privileged to the point where they can actually take the time to ruminate on things and create.
Sure.
Right. So, and again, I go back to that, like without, I mean, almost just simply put, without that something, we have nothing, right?
Yeah.
And but also, what was I going to say earlier about?
Well, I think one of the things when I kick around this question too is in there's space for it too, because it's, and I think about it in Buddhist terms of the nothing, right? So the nothing or emptiness, but within the Buddhist tradition, yes, there is an analysis of there being no thing, no inherent existence behind the thing that you're saying, and there's a reclamation, in my opinion, of the nothingness, and that there's no special beingness, there's no special Plato ideal form in the sky. There's it's a phenomenon, and so I always thought within the show, as far as terms, is I've always left them ambiguous, because no thing, nothing in Western Western tradition has its meaning, but it can also have meanings in other ways. I think when I was interviewed on this show, I dropped into that type of analysis of the nothingness or the no thingness in Buddhism.
And in that regard, like with Buddhism, right? Like it's like the goal is to have nothing, because once you achieve that and aren't trying to fill yourself with that, then you have not just something, but like everything.
You have everything. You got everything.
Everything you need, everything you want, right?
It's right in front of you.
Absolutely. And there's an interesting, so it's almost like something through nothing.
Yeah. I think that's there.
Right.
Yeah.
But I was thinking too, when like the name with like something rather than nothing, I feel personally most alive when I'm creating and writing. I think there's something inherent about being human, that we want to create something, we want to do something. Like you even said it, we were talking earlier, like you have your job, you have your life, you have your career, but this podcast is something that you can do, that you can kind of
This is the big one. This is me. This is the big one.
Right?
Yep.
This is your something.
Yep.
And it's like, I teach and I love it, and I get to kind of interact with hilarious high school students, and my whole career has been awesome. But there's something different about, since I started writing, I feel like something that was missing is there. And Neil Gaiman is famous for saying, like one of his favorite things about art and writing is that like there was nothing there, and then you started thinking and wrote it down. And then so when you write something, whether it's a poem or a story, like that did not exist in the world before you created it and put it there. And now it's this artifact. Now it's this thing that other people can go do. So you're creating that something. And the kind of just the echoes of that. I always love that thought. Like I've thought about that with even these little poems that sometimes seem so menial or trite or just me grasping at the universe. But now they're reminders for me. Like even as I was just going back and reading through those, I'm like, oh my gosh, I remember where I was when I wrote that. I remember what I was thinking. I remember what I was going through.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful that I'm here now as a result of it.
A deep process. Yeah. I'm a big Neil Gaiman fan, as well as ex-wife Amanda Palmer for around art, and I got the Sandman. Yeah, I got the Sandman death tattoo, I'm actually showing Craig so anyways, the death character from Neil Gaiman's Sandman. But what I always adored about the image is the panel, and she says peachy keen, which is just old fashioned and like whimsical. And I
feel like there's little moments where I realize that I feel like I'm parenting right, because my kids got me this. It's Funko Pop of Death from
we get a
Sandman.
Funko Pop of Death. So I believe towards the end of this episode, Craig and I have stumbled into our next episode. Could be made of component parts. Probably the Neil Gaiman in Amanda Palmer. Just loveliness. Yeah, let's do that next. But tell folks where to get your stuff.
Yeah, so there's 2 novels and 2 collections of poetry right now. The Doom That Came to Astoria and The Dreams in the Pearl House are parts 1 and 2 of the Northwest Trilogy, which is they follow Charlie West, who comes from kind of an abusive past, and he's got some cracks in his soul, and he's just trying to put his life back together. And then there's these supernatural elements. It's very Lovecraftian, kind of borrows from Lovecraft.
Love that.
But to me, it also is kind of a middle finger to Lovecraft, because he wrote all these stories that I love about really anxious people, but they're all very well, there's no hope. I realized that I read them because these people were all in terrible trauma and had no hope of coming out. So
it's like a closed engine of hell.
Yeah, and exactly, which is like I spent years feeding that into myself, which is really just feeding that thought that I was never going to come out. So my books are kind of like an ode to Lovecraft, while kind of flipping them off too, saying, look, I'm going to write a horror story that actually ends in an okay place.
Yeah. Well, my dad told me all about Lovecraft growing up because he's from Rhode Island, Providence.
Oh yeah,
yeah. So wow. On every year on Halloween, couple other times, whole covens go to H.P. Lovecraft's grave, and it's just a wild.
Absolutely.
Scene. I just had to say that out loud.
Oh, absolutely. And then there's a third one, The Mountains at the Edge of Madness, which is kind of an ode to his most famous story where it culminates. That's coming out next year. And then there's 2 poetry books, To Chase the Sun and Among the Wildflowers. They chart my own. They're just poems that are chronologically published and that reflect my own journey of grappling and healing with mental health struggles and kind of reclaiming my own life. Which has been super fun. And you can they're on Amazon, but if you look me up on Instagram and just message me, you can actually just buy them straight through me, and then we don't have to support Jeff Bezos.
It's absolutely great option, and I encourage everybody. Another thing, Craig, I adore Astoria because for me it tweaks in unique elements of like immigration patterns and culture, which resemble a little bit more the East Coast where I'm from. You have the deep fisherman culture of the Eastern Seaboard, and a lot of the folks who were experts out that way had Astoria and the Columbia and the Pacific and that whole massive bar and channel and everything that's there.
It's like the most dangerous water path, that bar, right? In like the country.
Yeah. Well, Craig, and of course you're on Instagram, as you mentioned.
Yep.
Okay. So folks, check out Craig Randall. Really enjoy the book. Enjoy the books, Craig, but very useful for me the way I interact with art, to use them for living. And I think that part of the art and transformation is a huge piece of what we've been talking about.
Absolutely. And like, I appreciate hearing that. Thank you. Because I think that's where, again, there's almost a utility, I think, just the nature of like why I wrote the books. My hope is that, people can read them too, because I'm a, poetry nerd. So I'll pick up books of poetry just to read, to like practice analyzing and like break down and just love the language. But I think my hope is that there's a utility with my work that even the novels that like people could read and see themselves in and empathize with, or realize I've gotten a few lovely messages from people thinking like, hey, thank you for writing this because I thought I was alone.
Yeah. Well, and on that,
And
and that piece right there, and what I would say is, what I would say on that is, you were talking about, the hero, and I love this podcast and band, Death Valley Girls.
yeah,
Bonnie Bloomgarden does the Death Valley Girls podcast, which I just adore. But one of the pieces that she says that means so much to me because it's so direct is her guests are heroes, and I just
Mm.
wanted to say, in what you're talking about and doing what you're doing, I truly mean that. You're a hero in doing that and going through that and reconnecting
Oh, thank
from
you.
just, we got to think about ourselves and that, and the things that get away from, to live, to persevere, to go through the shit, the muck and the mire and the dark, and to come out to end. Heroes work. Heroes
Yeah,
work.
I mean, taking that hero full journey or the full circle, right? It's like, yeah, I mean, you have to go through it. You have to come out the other side.
Yeah, thank
Um,
you.
I don't think I started living until I came out the other side.
Here we go. And that's the hope. Hey, folks, we've been talking to Craig Randall. Check out his poetry writing. Learn about Astoria. Look up John Gardner's Art of Fiction. Look up Stephen King's On Writing. Neil Gaiman's Sandman.
Yeah.
Hero's Journeys. All this type of stuff. Craig, great pleasure having you on the show. Fantastic to meet you, and really look forward to everything else you write and create.
Oh, thanks for having me. Likewise, it's been a blast. Yeah, I'm excited. I think we should totally do that Sandman episode.
Let's announce it now. Folks, in the future, Craig Randall and Ken Vellante delve into the Sandman universe in both its TV form, but probably as a basic, the graphic novel form. Craig Randall, Ken Vellante, Sandman, Neil Gaiman episode coming up. Craig, it's been great to chat with you, and let's chat again soon.
Sounds good. It's been great to be here. Thank you.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing.